One day soon, someone will come up with a viable working model for a flying car. That person won't truly be the originator of the idea of flying cars, though, because the concept of a flying car has existed for as long as the car itself. Similarly, the idea of a mobile phone existed long before anyone was able to make one. Some of the things we think of as modern inventions are actually based on ancient ideas. And some of the historical artifacts you're about to see in this video were whole centuries ahead of their time. The official story of the invention of the telescope is that it was invented in the Netherlands in 1608. The real story might be that it was developed more than 3,000 years ago. This object you're looking at right now is the Nimrod lens, which is also known as the layered lens. It was discovered in 1850 in an Assyrian palace in what's now Iraq, and theories as to its actual function vary. Some people think it's a burning glass that would have been used to start fires by focusing sunlight. Even that would have been an impressive tool for 3,000 years ago. But the lens also works as a magnifying glass, and so it could easily have been used for that purpose. It's capable of magnifying objects by a factor of 3, precisely the same power as the first ever telescope. Because it was fashioned from natural rock crystal, it hasn't deteriorated over the 3 millennia of its existence. That, too, might have been a design choice. The ancient Assyrians had advanced astronomical knowledge for their time. Could lenses like this have been the reason why? We think of nanotechnology as a very new field of science. The idea of engineering on a microscopic scale was surely beyond the capabilities of our ancestors, after all. The ancient Romans would laugh at that suggestion. They had a pretty functional idea of how nanotechnology worked, and this 1,600-year-old Lycurgus cup proves it. The vessel looks green when you shine a light on it from the front, but red when you do the same thing from behind. The mystery wasn't solved until 1990, when an English research team put fragments of the glass under a microscope and realized that tiny particles of gold and silver had deliberately been placed into the glass mixture by the cup's Roman designer. The particles were smaller than 1,000th the size of a grain of salt and represent an incredible feat of precision engineering. The researchers had indisputable proof that the Romans knew how to use nanotechnology in art. If we go on to use it in medicine, we'll just be standing on their shoulders. What would you call an automated humanoid that can sing, dance, play music, or perform other automated tasks? If your answer is a robot, then we're forced to conclude that the ancient Chinese invented robots approximately 1,500 years ago. There are even reports of ancient Chinese robots that had realistic-looking hair, skin, bones, and muscle, although we have no direct evidence of that. What we do know is that King Lan Ling of the Han Dynasty had a machine shaped like a man that could bow to his guests and offer them a drink, and that was in the year 577. We also know that the ancient designer Dai Feng Ma made artificial birds that measured the direction of the wind, and an automated dresser for the queen that worked on switches, levers, and pulleys. Even more advanced were the robots built by Han Zhilei between 806 and 820, which included mechanical magpies and crows made from wood, but capable of simulating eating, drinking, and even singing. The oldest and best known of all the ancient Chinese robots is the south-pointing carriage, which was a navigational device created 1,700 years ago that always pointed due south. Prosthetic limbs are still a developing field of science and medicine, but how many people realize that the field has been developing since at least the 19th century? This Victorian-era prosthetic arm and hand look more sophisticated than the most basic of the devices that people wear now, with individual fingers and an adjustable wrist. If we didn't know better, we'd say it had come from the set of a science fiction steampunk movie. It isn't known who designed the limb or who it was made for, but it's currently on display at the London Science Museum in England. Each finger can curl up and straighten out, and a spring at the elbow joint allows for full mobility and range of motion there, too. What isn't clear is the method by which a person wearing the prosthetic could independently use it. There are no apparent means of moving any of the fingers without manipulating them by using your other hand. It may have looked better than it functioned as a prosthetic, but it's still years ahead of its time. In almost every part of the world, our ancient ancestors were big on gilding. They used it everywhere, from statues to the interior of cathedrals. Evidence of their extensive use of gilding is everywhere, but nowhere do we see the evidence of how they went about it. In a lot of cases, the level of gilding perfection they attained is above and beyond anything we are capable of today. And we're talking about people who were gilding temples and domes 8,000 years ago in Turkey. Electroplating could explain at least some of the work, but the official narrative of history says that electroplating wasn't invented until the 19th century. Close inspection of some ancient objects has shown that mercury was used as a glue to apply thin films of gold and silver to objects, a methodology that would be considered too dangerous today. Even though we are mostly at a loss to explain how it was done in the 21st century, it was so easy thousands of years ago that even criminals could do it. They often gilded statues with gold or silver to make them appear more valuable than they were. Everyone knows that Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. But when you were a child, you might have played a game involving a pretend telephone made of a piece of string and 2 plastic or paper cups. Most people assume that the toy version of the phone is based on Bell's invention, but it isn't. It predates it, and we know that because there's a 1,200-year-old version of a string and cup phone in the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian in Maryland, USA. Unfortunately, the device is made out of gourd and twine that's so delicate that we can't test it to ensure that it works as it appears it should. But there's no reason to doubt its functionality. The civilization that made the device was the Chimu Empire. They had no written language that we're aware of, and yet they were able to build something so sophisticated. The cord extends 75 feet, and therefore probably enabled communication either across one large home or between 2 neighbors. It was found in Peru during the 1930s, and is the only device of its type from that era ever discovered. Religious iconography is usually a labor of love for whoever makes it. But even taking that into account, these miniature boxwood carvings are incredibly sophisticated. Only 135 of the sculptures have ever been found, all of which were made between 1500 and 1530 in the Netherlands. That suggests that they may even all have been the work of one person. The tiny altars are held together by piercings so small that the joints are completely hidden. We've only been able to determine how they were put together using X-rays and microscopes. But the fact that we need such advanced technology to determine how they were made begs the question of how someone could have put them together without the use of such technology in the first place. The pins that keep everything in place are smaller than a seed of grass. The human eye is incapable of even seeing them. So how could human hands have moved them into place with such precision? Is someone in the Netherlands hiding an ancient X-ray machine? Human beings have been mapping the stars for as long as they've had the ability to see them. But very few civilizations had anything like the degree of insight or accuracy of the ancient Sumerian astronomer who made this clay star map 5,500 years ago. The astronomer had a particular reason to take an interest in the skies at the time they made the map. There was an asteroid on a collision course with Earth, and they were tracking its movements. The tablet is currently in possession of the British Museum and is referred to as the planisphere. It was first discovered in an underground library in Iraq during the 19th century. Translation of the text inscribed onto the tablet talks of a white stone ball approaching through the sky. Using a star map, which includes the names and arrangement of the constellations as they appeared at the time, the astronomer predicted where the asteroid would land within 1 degree of accuracy. It eventually came down in Kofels, Austria. The ancient Etruscans were something of an eccentric race. who else would have decided to record all of their knowledge of the Earth, Sun, Moon, and stars in the form of a bronze sculpture of a sheep's liver? The liver of Piacenza is approximately 2,200 years old and was found in a field close to Piacenza in 1877. Although they were native to Italy and their culture predates the current Italians, their land and people were wholly absorbed by the ancient Romans, which has meant some of their knowledge has been lost. They had their own specific religion, language, and philosophy of astrology, all of which were underpinned by predicting the future by reading animal entrails. That's a little messier than telling fortunes by reading palms. The liver is a kind of celestial map, but we don't know whether the Etruscans thought the universe was shaped like a sheep's liver or the shape was somehow linked to their fortune-telling techniques. Each area of the sky has been separated into zones, which again likely had implications for Etruscan soothsayers that we couldn't even begin to guess at today. This next artifact is probably the most famous one on our list. It's the Antikythera mechanism, a clockwork device that was found on an ancient Greek shipwreck. Just the fact that it's clockwork is incredible given its age, but its function is even more remarkable. When fully functional, the device was capable of predicting the movement of the stars, moon, sun, and planets across the sky with striking accuracy. Because it can be used to run simulations of astral movements, some experts have even gone as far as calling it the world's first computer. Whether you agree with calling it a computer or not, just the fact that the ancient Greeks had an automated calendar for the stars is remarkable. Its most likely use was in the field of astrology. It would have navigational potential, and the fact it was found inside a shipwreck might suggest it was used for that purpose. But if it was, why have we never seen another one? There are two ways to interpret the Iron Pillar of Delhi, which is sometimes called the Ashoki Pillar. Either the ancient Indians had knowledge of an advanced form of rust-proofing that they only ever used once, or they invented rust-proofing by accident and were never able to replicate the accident after they built the pillar. The 22-foot-tall pillar is around 1,500 years old, and yet it hasn't weathered or rusted in all the centuries it's been standing. That's because it has a very thin layer of mesowhite protecting it from the air, coating every inch of its surface. While it would be fantastic to imagine that the Indian steelworkers who made it put the coating on it deliberately, it's probably a happy accident that occurred during the construction process. The pillar was made inside a primitive coal furnace and would have been exposed to a combination of lime, damp, and slag as it was knocked into shape. The mesowhite would have been formed by the resulting chemical reaction. Regardless of whether it was an accident or not, it took the human race centuries to come up with anything as effective at keeping rust at bay. If you were a warrior heading into battle between the year 900 and the year 1100, and you saw that your enemies were carrying Ulfbert swords, your best advice would be to run as fast as possible in the opposite direction. The swords were the most lethal in the world at the time, and were light years ahead of the swords owned by any other race. Archaeologists have discovered many of the swords in Northern Europe, and believe that they are probably of Viking origin. The swords were made from casts. Iron would be melted with carbon and then poured into a mold to make the swords. That method eliminated weaknesses and impurities and made the swords at least 3 times stronger than those of any other medieval race. It would take the rest of Europe several centuries to cotton on to the idea of making steel this way. And the question of how the Vikings came up with the concept at such an early stage has never been resolved. Some people have suggested that the idea might have been taken from a tribe the Vikings encountered in Asia, but yet again, that's just a guess. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.